let's start discussing the NFL draft. Welcome in, Mike Renner. Welcome back.
Feels good to be back. Draft season is my favorite season because that's when you guys let me back on the podcast.
That is when we let you back. So we'll have more and more of you on the podcast. Moving forward, we'll be doing some weekly draft stuff. Eventually, we'll be doing probably 2 draft podcasts per week because that's what the people want, Mike. They love it. So
it matters.
Let's start just with a broad overview. We'll have many different ways we're going to attack this. We'll talk about position groups, our favorite players, our big boards. We'll talk about mock drafts and all that stuff. Do you want to do a mock in a couple weeks, by the way?
Of course.
Okay.
So you don't want to do a mock every single day.
Let's do it. In 2 weeks,
yeah,
you're going to do a mock.
All right.
My mock's doing pretty well. Everybody's watching it on YouTube. Everybody's watching it. So I think we'll just have competition so you can have the most viewed.
Idea. Okay, continue.
All right. So we're going to hit the biggest draft storylines. So about 20 to 30 minutes just going through the biggest storylines. So let's start with the quarterback situation. It's always the biggest story. Last year, there were 5 first-round quarterbacks. This year...
Well, 4 and a wide receiver. But continue.
Wow. 4 and a wide receiver.
Still, the jokes never get old.
Playoff quarterback... Don't talk about Josh Allen like that. That's not... He's more of a tight end. Playoff quarterback Lamar Jackson. You're calling a wide receiver. Ouch.
It's a joke, guys.
Last year... 5 first-round quarterbacks. We're like, oh, this quarterback class is loaded. This year, major question marks. Now Kyler Murray says he's going to the NFL draft, or at least declaring. What are we looking at here with this quarterback situation?
Yeah, I think about midway through this past season, we were wondering if there was anyone who was going to be worthy of a first-round pick. Now I think we've settled on the fact that Dwayne Haskins, after he closed the season strongly, we questioned him after that Penn State game where he really crumbled under pressure in that one. Close season strong. I think we're comfortable with him in the first round. We also like Kyler Murray from what he's done. If he does end up going to the NFL draft, from basically a skill set standpoint, he's not a perfect prospect by any means. He's not there.
No, he's
by any means.
5'10".
But the skills that he has as a passer and runner are enough to put him in the first round. But then after that, if someone else is going in the first round, it's going to be reachy for sure, in our opinion at this point.
Yeah.
The Drew Lock, though, Daniel Jones, they're rumored to be there at this point, which
I don't love. Drew Lock has grown on me. I'll say I've liked his progression year over year at Missouri. Daniel Jones, just not there yet.
Yes.
I mean, this is purely, he's 6'5".
The Duke quarterback, in case you're
Duke
familiar.
quarterback Daniel Jones, 6'5", 220. One of those guys who's kind of on the watch list because he's got NFL-type skills. He can make NFL-type throws, and he's got pretty good movement for, a 6'5", 220-plus pound player. He just has not been good on a throw-for-throw basis the last couple of years. Will Greer's another guy that we really like. Probably just feel more comfortable with him at the back end of the first. Let's discuss Kyler really quick because that's the biggest story of this whole thing. I mean, he's 5'10", but he goes out there. He's got our highest-graded passing grade, highest-graded rushing grade last year at Oklahoma. He's not as good as Baker Mayfield. I think we're just going to keep saying that over and over again. Even though the grade was similar, we had 3 years of data on Baker playing at an elite level, not just 1. And Baker did most of his stuff in the pocket and in places that translates to the next level.
Yes.
And Kyler's a step below that, but he's still a very good prospect.
Yes, and he's going to be a difficult eval because defenses also played him differently than they played Baker.
True.
He faced basically more 3-man rushes, or he did face more 3-man rushes than any other quarterback in the country this season.
About a third of his dropbacks.
And also had more clean pockets than basically any quarterback in the country this season. He was sitting back there all day long. It didn't have to make quick sort of NFL progressions to make plays down the field. Now, when the ball left his hand, to where it went to the wide receiver, he was about as good as any quarterback in the country, probably the best quarterback in the country in terms of that. But that's only part of the game in the NFL. You have to be able to do a lot of other things to play the quarterback position successfully. So will he get to that point? That's the tough one to part. But I'm going to bet on the guy who has that arm talent, the guy who has that skill set already, than the guy who's wildly inaccurate but looks the part already.
So here's the thing, right? Most people are going to say, well, Kyler Murray comes with a lot of question marks because he's 5'10". But who has more question marks, Kyler Murray or Drew Lock or Daniel Jones?
Yes, right.
It's the 6'4" quarterbacks that have bigger question marks because Drew Lock has not done a good job. He's not in a system that really works on this a whole lot, but he doesn't go through progressions, get to a second read, have great footwork in the pocket. Same thing with Daniel Jones. Throw-for-throw accuracy, his ability to get to the next receiver accurately hasn't been great. Will Greer, I have more concerns about maybe downfield arm strength a little bit. I like his accuracy. He could throw at the intermediate level. He had a ton of deep balls that were pretty good in the Big 12, but it doesn't always translate. So I think those guys might have more question marks than Kyler, but everybody's going to talk about Kyler's height.
Yeah, everyone's going to talk about his height, but it goes back to, not going to say like Baker last year, but if the biggest knock on him is his height, I don't think that's really a knock. And if you're disregarding a guy because he's undersized, well, I don't think you're looking at how the game is played in 2018 and in 2019. It's only going to trend that way more in the future. It is not a pure pocket passing game anymore. So much of what wins in the NFL today is outside the pocket or utilizing the quarterback as a rushing threat, utilizing his legs, not necessarily exposing him to more shots, but just having that threat there impacts defenses so much. And we've seen it with a ton of quarterbacks now. It's been proven again and again that can work in the NFL. And so if you're writing him off because of that, I think you're just wholly close-minded.
So I agree. This is the time for him to enter the NFL. I do think if this was maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe he's saying, no, I'm going to play baseball. Nobody's going to give me this opportunity. Let's wrap up the QB discussion with Haskins. A lot of people are calling him maybe the slam dunk top quarterback off the board, and I like a lot of what he does. I think his balance in the pocket is really nice. He throws really well from a clean pocket. He's got good zip on the ball, accurate to the intermediate level, which I think is huge. I mean, the most important thing probably at the NFL level, I do hate how he played under pressure. And I know we always talk about here about how consistent clean pocket stuff is versus under pressure, but he was at such a poor level from a PFF grade standpoint. And it was in those big games, those big road games against a Penn State, against Purdue, and other games where he really did struggle anytime guys were in his face. So that's where I have question marks about Haskins. Also, his numbers were a little inflated. He had a great scheme and playmakers there. So I thought he was good, not great, last year for Ohio State.
Yeah, he does. He's not without question marks. And again, when you see a guy only play for 1 year, and I guess this applies to Kyler Murray too, you just get a little concerned with small sample sizes because you haven't faced. You'd like to see a breadth of a guy playing 2, 3, 4 years, sort of like Mitchell Trubisky coming out. He just only had that one season to where. When you have those question marks, like Trubisky had the NC State game, I think it was, where it was just you have this ugly on tape. You don't know if that's something that he sort of hid well and is going to come out more at the next level, or if that is just a blip on the radar.
And we use the term with Trubisky that maybe he's got more room to grow, and you could say that for Haskins. Like they're still, and for Kyler, I mean they're young quarterbacks from a starting standpoint. So does that give them more room to grow, or does that just cloud your evaluation because you have less to work off, like you're saying? So those are the types of question marks we'll be hoping to answer over
I will
these
say
next
though,
couple
Haskins' arm talent, love his arm talent. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I love his arm quite a bit. So what we're doing here at PFF, we've got the production grade for all these guys, and then we go back, we rewatch these guys. Zach Robinson's going to be getting in there on all the quarterbacks. He's got some strong opinions on all these guys. He's training a couple guys out in California right now.
That sounds like conflict of interest, I'll just say.
No, Zach is very honest.
I know, but it's still, I'm kidding.
We do protect him, though. Yeah. We protect him. He can't he can't trash guys that he's working with. But he's very honest about his evaluations, which I think is great. So we'll have much more on the quarterbacks moving forward. The second biggest story, Mike, defensive line.
Yes.
There's a million guys here.
Great,
how do we
great draft to be in need of defensive line. Just going through a little napkin, back of the napkin sort of count here. I counted 13. Very realistic number, 13 being 13 defensive linemen going in the first round of this draft. That could even go higher with guys, moving throughout the draft process, depending on who tests well, who has a good Senior Bowl, that sort of thing. I think realistically, 13 is almost like a baseline. I think that is where we're going to end up when it comes, late April, who ends up getting off the board.
We're talking about Quinnen Williams. He was our top guy. Do you have Ed Oliver on this list?
I don't even have Ed Oliver on that list.
I'm looking at this list that you wrote down here, and you even forgot Ed Oliver, the guy.
14. That's why I said 13 is the baseline.
People were talking about Ed Oliver going top 10. So there's multiple reasons why Ed Oliver might not go top 10. First off, because there's 13 other guys that are in this mix in the first round, and secondly, because he's probably about 275 pounds and 6'1", and we usually are the people that are like, no, worry about production, not the size. But that's our bigger concern with Oliver than the 270 pounds is the fact that he never really dominated in the AAC from a pass rush perspective.
What was it, 25 pressures this past season?
Yeah, and that was
his highest of his career.
His best year rushing the passer.
Which, Quinnen doubled that this year. That's not great for a guy who you think this undersized guy is going to struggle then more in the run game at the next level. An undersized defense tackle, you worry about him struggling, not in the run game, not as a pass rusher. He hasn't even done it as a pass rusher yet. While the traits are certainly there, you'd love to have seen him do it already. I wish he would have gone to, no offense to Houston, anyone who went to Houston coaching staff, if you're listening, no offense, a school with better coaching staff that would have developed him more than they did at Houston, because he was the same player basically he was freshman year in terms of the developmental curve wise.
But that might work in his favor, right?
Yeah.
When you say, okay, when he does get NFL coaching. And that sounds cliche, but I like the way you're using it, because specifically what you saw with your eyes.
Yeah.
And
it just did not improve.
We're on the same page as far as that. So we're talking Quinnen Williams from Alabama, Jeffrey Simmons from Mississippi State, Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence out of Clemson, Josh Allen from Kentucky could be a top 5 pick now.
Yeah.
We've got a big profile on him coming out very soon that I think is very well done by our video guys. Just keep your eyes open for that on YouTube shortly. Ja'Kai Polite from Florida. Did you even get Burns in here?
I didn't get Brian Burns.
Got Brian Burns. 15 guys.
Awful.
I'm just looking at the list. I like how you did it off the top of your head, and we're still missing guys here. Draymond Jones, Jerry Tillery. So there's a lot of players. There's 3 Clemson players. Cleveland Farrell is in there as well. Brian Burns from Florida State. So I'm just naming a bunch of players.
Rashawn Gary, Montez Sweat, Nick Bosa.
Rashawn Gary and Montez Sweat feel like the guys that there's a little bit of projection there. It's trait.
Gary is so projection.
Gary really is.
Yes, but I'd be very surprised if he doesn't go in the first round.
People keep asking me why Rashawn Gary's not in my first round mock, and it's because you'll hear us say this over and over. We feel best about our defensive line grades as far as translating to the NFL. So it just raises a question mark. It's not that he can't do it, but if there's one place where I'm going to rely on the grades more than other places, based off our 4 years, 5 years now doing this, it's on the defensive line. And Gary never dominated in college.
Not even close to dominate. It even didn't even really have games where he took over, where it's like, oh, he should. Gary was everywhere in that game. Even against when you have that physical sort of advantage, it should at least show up when you're facing slap tackles who don't know what they're doing, who are 285 pounds and can't hold up to a bull rush to save their lives. That's when you should take over games. Rashawn Gary didn't even do that.
Chase Winovich did it a lot more than him.
Correct.
His high energy teammate on the other side.
Ooh, let's. Oh, we need like a cliche segment, but we'll do that later. Yeah,
high energy motor guy. Nick Bosa, you mentioned briefly, but yeah, he's in the running to be the #1 overall pick, by the way, because we have 2 years plus another 112, 115 snaps or so from last year where he did dominate. He just straight dominated, start to finish. We hate making the brother comps, but from a grade standpoint, the college grades for Nick versus Joey Bosa, very, very similar, and we've seen what Joey's done at the NFL level. So the defensive line class, that's your second biggest story. Where do all these guys
first round? I mean, it could be half the first round realistically. That's not even exaggeration, and I don't even think it's one of those where they're going to get pushed down because there's so many good ones and you'll find one in the second round. No, because they're all so good and everyone covets defensive line so highly that you better go get one, because there's a handful of elite and then there's a handful of good, and then I'm not sure there's a ton of second and third rounders that I'm going to be coveting highly.
I think they might fall, though, because if you look, there's always going to be a team. We're going to talk about the receivers in a second, but there's always going to be a team that's like, all right, let me just squeeze these couple offensive linemen in there. I need a tackle. Yeah. There's always some rogue safety that ends up in the first round.
Someone drafts purely based on need.
Terrell Edmonds. Hello. So you just never really know. So yeah, there are so many players that could. Or you look at the Raiders with 3 picks, and they need defensive linemen.
Or maybe they could.
Do they? Well, I mean, at least get 2. They could at least get 2 and completely revamp that pass rush. All right, let's discuss the wide receiver class, the third biggest story about with regard to this draft class. It's similar to the defensive linemen, although probably with more question marks. There are a bunch of big receivers in this class. There's a lot of guys who have first-round type of talent, but you've talked about this a lot. The way the NFL's going, do we really want these 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" wide receivers? And, what happens with the wide receiver board? Who's the first wide receiver off the board? It's wide open.
That's more of the biggest question with me. It's not necessarily, who's #1, whatever, because every team's going to have their own eval, but it's the fact that we have this wide receiver class where a good chunk of the top guys are these contested catch, larger wide receivers, not necessarily the route runners, the separators, the quicker guys. They are, N'Keal Harry, Kelvin Harmon, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, DK Metcalf, Akeem Butler, all 6'4" or above, all big catch radius guys, all not extremely athletic enough to where you say, oh, they're, you know, on the Julio Jones level of large, where it doesn't really matter. You're athletic enough and big enough that you're just going to be separating constantly.
That's what separates Julio, not to use, no
Yes.
pun. So Julio and AJ Green.
Yes.
Good route runners, they can get open, and oh, by the way, in contested catches, they can win.
Yes. So I don't think any of them are at that level. So at that point, I'm not calling them Laquan Treadwell, but I do think that is a higher sort of bust rate of those guys who can't separate consistently at a high level. The bigger guys, I'm not sure the NFL's trending towards that. So we'll see where that sort of group of guys ends up getting taken.
So does that make PFF's highest graded receiver, Andy Isabella,
yes, it does.
a little bit more coveted?
No,
or Marquise Brown is more of a speed guy?
I do think Andy Isabella, not to get derailed here, but I think he's going to be this year's Cooper Kupp in terms of no one's going to take him in the first round. No one is willing to take a 5'9" white receiver in the first round and say, we're going to make him, he's going to be our number one, because you want number one, in quotation marks, sort of traits from a guy you're going to draft in the first round. But at the same time, I think he's going to be incredibly productive because he does separate. He is incredibly fast. He has all the tools to win at the NFL level, but someone's going to take him round 2, 3 and get a great player.
Wow. So the wide receiver class, guys like N'Keal Harry, who seemed like he was destined to be a first-round pick a few years ago, might actually be better as a second-round prospect. As we get
might get pushed down. Yes.
J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who I love from Stanford. I mean, they just straight used him as a power forward at times. I've never seen anything like it. They would just go tell him box out and here, call for the ball, and he would do it. Great body control. DK Metcalf and that upside. So there's upside. Oh. DK Metcalf. A lot of people talking about him as the first-round pick. He's kind of like the Rashawn Gary of wide receivers, though, right?
Yes.
He's got all the skills, but just never really dominated.
Really got dominated, correct.
So there's a lot to unpack with this wide receiver class. And again, we're only scratching the surface on our draft evaluations. We've got the grades. Those are the guiding light, so to speak, and then we kind of sift through and figure out the most important parts of them and what we see from skill sets and everything. So that's what we'll be doing over these next few weeks.